Scientists set a limit, a theoretical ceiling, the deepest any fish could possibly survive. Beyond that depth, the pressure would destroy the proteins inside living tissue. Nothing could go deeper. Then a camera captured a fish, right at that limit, maybe past it. And when scientists examined the footage and studied its biology, nothing about this fish made sense. It had no swim bladder, its bones were almost translucent, and its skull never fully hardened. Not damaged, not diseased. That was the design. This video is about what scientists found when they went to the deepest place on Earth, and why, the further they looked, the stranger it got. In 1875, a British Navy ship called HMS Challenger was doing something routine, lowering a weighted rope into the ocean to measure the depth. They'd done it hundreds of times on that voyage. But this time, the rope kept going. They let out more. It kept going. On March 23rd, after nearly 5 miles of rope, it finally hit bottom. The scientists on board were astonished. They repeated the measurement. The results held. They had just found the deepest place on Earth, completely by accident. They named it Challenger Deep, a narrow slot at the bottom of the Mariana Trench in the western Pacific Ocean, nearly 7 miles beneath the surface. No sunlight, temperature just above freezing, and pressure more than 1,000 times what you're feeling right now just sitting there. For most of history, scientists assumed almost nothing could survive in a place like that. They were wrong. But the first thing they found when cameras finally reached the bottom wasn't a creature. It was something that shouldn't exist at all. When the first cameras reached the deep sea floor, the footage looked wrong. The scientists watching weren't sure what they were seeing. A shoreline, ripples, a flat, glassy surface sitting inside the ocean, with a visible boundary where 2 bodies of water met. It was a lake, at the bottom of the sea. Not a lake in the poetic sense, an actual lake, with its own shoreline, its own surface, its own chemistry. These are called brine pools. They form when extremely salty water, far denser than the surrounding ocean, settles into depressions on the sea floor. Because it's so dense, it doesn't mix. It just sits there, a separate body of water inside another body of water. And here's the thing about those lakes. They're basically death traps. Animals that wander in are killed almost immediately. Scientists have filmed crabs crawling to the edge, dipping in, and going rigid. The concentrated salt and chemicals are so hostile that most creatures can't survive more than a few seconds of contact. The seafloor around some brine pools is lined with the remains of animals that wandered too close. And yet, life still found a way. Specialized organisms thrive right at the edges, surviving in conditions lethal to almost everything else on Earth. Scientists had to completely rethink what life could tolerate. But the brine pools weren't the strangest thing down there, not even close, because something was swimming in the darkness, something that had been redesigned from the inside out to survive the one thing that should make survival impossible. The Hadal snailfish is pale, almost translucent, looks a bit like a tadpole. It holds the depth record for the deepest fish ever filmed, 8,336 meters below the surface, captured on camera in August 2022 in the Izu Ogasawara Trench off Japan. To give you a sense of what that number means, scientists had predicted the theoretical maximum depth a fish could survive at somewhere between 8,200 and 8,400 meters. The snailfish is right at that limit. And the scientist who originally made that prediction told the BBC that if the record is ever broken, it will probably be by only a few meters. This may be as deep as any fish can go. But here's what I want you to focus on. Not the depth record itself, but what this fish had to become to survive down there. Because almost everything about its body is wrong. It has no swim bladder. That's the gas-filled organ most fish use to control buoyancy. At those depths, a swim bladder would collapse under the pressure. So the snailfish doesn't have one. Instead, its body is mostly water. Gelatinous, water-rich tissue that lets the pressure pass through it rather than fight against it. Its bones are thin, incompletely formed, almost translucent, and its skull never fully hardens. Not a defect, a design. A rigid skull at those pressures would crack. So this fish evolved a skull that flexes under force rather than shattering. We build things to survive pressure by making them stronger. This fish survived by becoming softer. But the skull is just the beginning. Because the deeper problem isn't structural, it's chemical. At extreme depth, pressure doesn't just crush physical structures, it deforms proteins. Proteins are the molecules that run almost every process in your body. Digestion, movement, repair, everything. They work because of their shape. When pressure distorts that shape, they stop working. And when proteins stop working, the animal dies. This is why scientists set the depth limit in the first place. Past a certain point, no amount of structural adaptation helps. The chemistry itself breaks down. The snailfish solved this with a molecule called TMAO, trimethylamine oxide. TMAO floods the fish's tissue and stabilizes proteins against the crushing force of deep pressure. It acts like a chemical shield, keeping proteins in their correct shape even when the physical environment would normally destroy them. And here's the part that stopped researchers cold. The deeper a snailfish lives, the higher its TMAO concentration. It self-doses. The deeper it goes, the more protection it builds. Like altitude sickness medication, except in reverse, going down instead of up, and built into the biology itself. Scientists are now studying how TMAO does this, because if you can understand the mechanism, it may have applications far beyond the deep ocean. What this fish figured out millions of years ago, researchers are only beginning to understand. But pressure and chemistry weren't the only problems the deep ocean created. There was also the darkness. And what the snailfish did to survive that is almost philosophical. There is no light at 8,000 meters. None. Sunlight doesn't penetrate past a few hundred meters of water. By the time you're at the depth the snailfish lives, you have been in total darkness for miles. Your body clock, your circadian rhythm, runs on light. It tracks the cycle of day and night and uses it to regulate sleep, hunger, metabolism, hormones. Almost every animal on Earth has this system. The snailfish doesn't. Scientists analyzed its genome and found that the genes responsible for circadian rhythms, the specific genes PER2A, CRY1A, CRY3, CRY5, are either lost or no longer functional. The fish has no meaningful sense of day or night, no concept of morning, no cycle of sleep and waking. It lives in a place where time, in the biological sense, doesn't pass. And here's what I find remarkable about that. It's not just that the fish lost something, it's that it lost it on purpose. Evolution deleted genes that had no use and kept only what still worked. Which raises the question, what did it decide was still worth keeping? vision in the deep ocean is almost useless. No sunlight, nothing to see, at least not in the way we understand seeing. So the snailfish lost most of its vision genes. Color vision, gone entirely, deleted from the genome. But it kept the genes for low light vision, the kind that detects faint flickers in near total darkness. Because there is one light source down there: bioluminescence. Other creatures in the deep produce their own light, and in total darkness, detecting that faint glow, whether it's prey, a predator, or something else, is the only vision still worth having. So evolution deleted everything else and kept only that. No color, no detail, no daylight. Just the ability to see a glow in the dark and know something is there. The snailfish didn't just adapt to the deep ocean. It stripped itself down to the minimum required to survive it. And the more scientists looked, the more they found that same principle playing out everywhere, even in the place they expected to be the most barren of all. In 2015, NOAA researchers lowered a specially built titanium hydrophone into Challenger Deep. It sat at the bottom of the planet and recorded for 22 days. What they expected, I think, was silence. 7 miles of ocean above you, total darkness, crushing pressure. If any place on Earth should be quiet, it's the bottom of the Mariana Trench. It was not quiet. Earthquakes, both near and far, rumbled through constantly. A Category 4 typhoon passing at the surface sent shock waves all the way down through 7 miles of water, registering clearly on the recording. Ships on the surface were audible, their engines, their movement, clearly heard at the bottom of the ocean. And somewhere above, baleen whales were calling to each other. Their voices traveled down through 7 miles of water and reached the bottom. Think about what that means. There's a fish at the bottom of the Mariana Trench that has lost its color vision, lost its sense of time, lives in a body that never fully hardened, and above it, 7 miles up, there are whales singing, and the sound reaches it. The deepest place on Earth isn't isolated from the world above it. It hears the typhoons. It hears the ships. It hears the whales. It just can't see any of it. And it never will. So here's what we actually found at the bottom of the deepest place on Earth. A lake inside an ocean that kills almost everything that enters it, but has its own ecosystem at the edges. A fish that broke the theoretical depth limit, that softened its skull instead of hardening it, that deleted its body clock and most of its vision because the deep ocean made them useless. And a place that everyone assumed would be silent, that turned out to be listening to the whole world above it. What I want you to take from this is simple. The rules we thought governed life, sunlight, stability, a body that holds its shape, weren't rules at all. They were suggestions. And the deep ocean ignored them. But everything we covered today still follows a kind of logic. Pressure, darkness, chemistry. The snailfish solved real problems with real adaptations we can examine and understand. Part 2 is where that logic starts to break. We're going to look at a single cell the size of a baseball that builds architecture. A fish with teeth so transparent that engineers are trying to copy the nanostructure. Microbes that colonized a volcano within hours of it cooling. And life that may have been sealed under Antarctic ice for millions of years, still alive. These aren't adaptations, they're something else. None of these were the strangest things hiding in the deep. Because the deeper scientists looked, the more the rules of life seemed to fall apart. The next discoveries didn't just challenge assumptions, they rewrote them entirely. If you don't want to miss part 2, like and subscribe, because some of the strangest discoveries are still ahead. See you in the next episode.